Okay, so we're recording. I'm going to hit start now. So we will be seen and heard by the audience starting now. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar this afternoon. We're just going to wait a couple minutes to let people in. And our apologies for the late start today. We had a little bit of a tech challenge that we're working on, but we're so glad that you're with us and we appreciate your patience today. Okay, we're going to hold tight for another few seconds. Thank you to everyone joining us today. Some of us are in rainy Toronto. We hope that you have nicer weather wherever you're joining from today. Okay. So we're going to get started now. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the session. My name is Kelsey Goforth, and I'm Dying with Dignity Canada's Director of Programs. Today, I'm joined by my colleagues, Amanda Coventry-Barrage and Melissa Mueller. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that while we are meeting virtually today, the land that Dying with Dignity Canada is on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We invite and encourage you to do your own research regarding the various treaties, in particular the land on which you're meeting with us today. I'm thrilled to welcome you today to another webinar. This is part of our End in Mind series, and we are talking about MAID and religion. Throughout this series, we aim to provide you with information and key takeaways, as well as create space for conversation on end-of-life topics and MAID alongside the professionals that know it best. Before I welcome today's presenters, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. Everyone on the call today is muted. However, there will be opportunities to submit questions, and we'd love to hear from you. To do so, please type your questions into the questions bar at the Zoom side panel. It should be at the bottom of your screen there, and we'll read it out for you at the end. Please try to keep your questions as clear and concise as possible so we can get to as many as possible today. We will try to get to all of the viewer questions, but unfortunately, we might not be able to get to everybody. So if you do have outstanding questions or questions that are quite personal in nature and need a direct response, please contact us at support@dyingwithdignity.ca, and we will follow up with you individually. We also have a post-webinar survey that's going to pop up on your screen after the webinar, and that will give you the opportunity to share your feedback. The session is being recorded today, so you have the opportunity to watch it again if you like, or share with any friends or family members who might be interested. Now, I'd love to introduce today's speakers. First, we have with us Rabbi Eva Goldfinger. Eva is a therapist, educator, intermarriage specialist, and a spiritual leader for Orenu Congregation for Humanist Judaism since 1988. She has earned her bachelor's and master's degree in Jewish studies from Hebrew College and a master's in rabbinics from the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism. And she was ordained as a rabbi in October 2005. In her capacity as a spiritual leader, she has provided pastoral support and prenuptial counseling, adult education workshops, seminars, and lectures, and is the director of Life Cycles. Eva has also run a successful private practice since 1986, working with individuals, couples, and families, and is a respected intermarriage specialist working with interfaith, and interracial couples and families, and running workshops at various conferences around North America. Welcome. And next we have Yme with us. Yme Woensdregt was born in Holland, and immigrated to Canada soon after. He lives on the traditional unceded territory of the Ktunaxa Nation. He retired in 2020 after serving in ministry in both the Presbyterian Church in Canada and the Anglican Church of Canada since 1982. He holds a progressive view of Christian faith and is open to many other expressions of connection with the divine. Yme writes a weekly column on matters of faith and spirituality in the local newspaper, an interest he developed over the course of his ministry, reaching out to people who might otherwise never think about such things. He developed an interest in MAID due to a brain cancer which took the life of his wife, Lori, before MAID was an option. He has accompanied several other people and their families through their own journeys with MAID, in addition to leading information classes in the parish he served at the time. Thank you for joining us today, Yme. And our third speaker today is Beverly Wilkins. Bev is a grief group facilitator, congregational nurse, and visiting nurse. Her occupation as a trained palliative care nurse brought her into intimate contact with many patients going through their final stage of life. She possesses a serenity and ease of the vocabulary around death and dying because of her complete belief that it really is not the end, conceptualizing it as more like a birthday following a birthday. She believes that we are all born to eventually die to another life. And she leaves us. Hi, Bev. Great to see you.
Hi there. Finally, my apologies for taking so long to get on here, but just the techno mutts were at it.
That's okay. No, we're glad that you're here, and these things happen. You know, we love Zoom. It brings everybody together from different parts of the country, but it can be a little bit complicated sometimes and not work the way we want it to. So welcome to all three of our speakers. I'm going to turn it over to Amanda now to get us started with the interview today.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Kelsey, for that introduction. Welcome, everybody. We're really excited to get started today. Bev's going to be joining us with audio by call, so you won't be able to see her face, but you'll be able to hear her lovely voice. And so let's dive right into it. Now we have three panelists today, so we're going to try and make sure that we divvy up time for every member to answer each question. So Eva, if you don't mind, we'll start with you. So for our first question, can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with your faith and what called you to serve as a leader of that faith?
So I was raised in a very ultra-Orthodox, which is called Hasidic, meaning pietist Jewish family, primarily in Toronto once we immigrated as refugees. And I loved it. I mean, I loved being religious. And then I discovered that my love of learning was not going to be encouraged in that movement of Judaism. And I just wanted to keep learning. So I'm connected less to what you would call faith, perhaps in terms of a belief in a supernatural being. My faith is in human beings and our responsibility to make a difference and to fix the problems in the world. And I came to that when I was 14, but I didn't come to this movement until the early 1980s. And I'm delighted to have had the opportunity to live a passionate life of what I consider integrity for me and my beliefs.
Thank you, Eva. Yes, thank you. That answers it perfectly. And it's so wonderful to hear that it's a drive of learning, first and foremost, that puts you on this path. And I'm really glad that you stuck to it, because it sounds like through your introduction, you've been able to help so many people with the learning that you've gained. So thank you. And Yme, I'll pass the question on to you. Can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with your faith and what called you to serve as a leader of that faith?
Like Eva, I grew up in a religious family, and we were part of a Dutch Reformed church originally, and then moved to the Presbyterian church. And again, like Eva, I loved being part of that kind of milieu. And so I after a little bit of struggle, I finally decided that yes, this was a calling for a vocation for my life. And so and for me, it has to do with learning, but also sharing that learning with other folks, and talking with other folks about our faith, our life in the light of that faith, and our relationship with God and with one another, as well as with all of God's creatures. So I started with the Presbyterian Church, but then in 2000, I switched over to the Anglican Church of Canada. And I need to say that I'm not a spokesman for the Anglican Church. The opinions I express are purely my own, and I'm delighted to be a part of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. We're delighted to have you join us. And we just wanted to issue a correction just before we get to your answer, Bev. We just wanted to issue a correction that originally in our promotional materials for this webinar, it was incorrectly stated that Yme was a member of the Catholic faith. That's not correct. Yme is a retired Anglican minister. So apologies to our audience for that mistake, and we'll move forward with that. Thank you so much for your answer, Yme. And Bev, the exact same question to you. What is your relationship with your faith, and what called you to serve as a leader of it?
The relationship with my faith started, I guess, when I was very small. I wrote about it when I was in my little book that I issued. It had to do with being 3 years old and in the hospital, and a lovely light being showed up in my room when I was just 3 years old. And it ended up to be, it was my grandfather, but with a voice, with a light all around it, and either an angel or a light being. And it ended up that my grandfather, in fact, had died that afternoon in the driveway. So I was always very open to there being something else out there. Being raised in a real Christian home and a Presbyterian again, here we are. I therefore always had faith, brought up in that kind of a faith within. Lots of missionaries. We looked after their cats when they went to the mission field, all of that kind of wonderful stuff, but always in awe of the fact that there was a fine line between living and dying, which you really learn on a farm. I then went into nursing, which I believed was my true calling, and at the same time hoping then to go on in the mission field, and wavered from that. But at that time, when I was 12 years old, I knew God was with me, and I didn't have to fear where I would be going when I died. And I've lived most of my life in that manner, went on to be a nurse for a lot of years, and then got called 18 years ago into this lovely job called a congregational nurse, which has therefore led to such a wonderful unfolding of reassuring people who are older to not be afraid to die. That's where I am.
Yes. Thank you so much, Bev. And thank you for all of your answers. It really sounds like this was something that started early on for everybody, and being encircled by the culture and by the faith as well. And really just what I've noticed from all of your answers is a desire to share what you've learned, and that thirst for learning with others in your community. So I really respect that. So thank you, everybody, for that. So we're going to move a little bit more now towards end of life questions and that sort of thing. So I want to start first now with Yme. After a person has died, there are often ceremonies or practices or rituals. Can you share what those ceremonies or practices might look like for someone in your faith?
Certainly. It starts with a private kind of a ceremony where I would gather with the family and just offer pastoral support and prayer and talking about the amazing presence of the person who had died in the life of those who are left behind, and then we would plan a more public memorial or funeral service where the community could surround that family in their grief, tell their own stories, highlight the gifts that the person who had died had brought with them into their own lives. I have done this with both members of my congregation, but also in the small town in which I live, with members of the public who have no religious affiliation, but want something that provides the family with a dignified way of saying goodbye. So.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that answer. And I think it's also very powerful too, how you've mentioned that even those who are not necessarily religiously affiliated, that you also welcome them and give them a service for their loved one that's passed away, and still offering them that dignified end. So I think that's very beautiful as well. And I think Bev, we'll move to you this time. After a person has passed, could you share what some of those ceremonies or practices might look like for someone who's a member of your faith?
I think as a member of the faith, again, generally, that is the person who is at bedside. I've been privileged in the fact that I've been there as a nurse a lot of times. And it's quite amazing over the last 25 years of how many individuals still have not even addressed the idea that they're going to die. Within our own faith, it's similar to what Yme has described, that being a time of prayer and closeness at the time of death, and then switching then into something within the faith, often within a funeral home where there are prayers, and the handling of the body itself then gets into discussion. At the bedside, though, when you as a nurse are standing there, often it therefore then modulates into being something like, well, what would you like to do? In fact, some of them have said, oh, we never talked that over. We didn't think it was going to happen. So personally, I have done such things as assign the grandchildren to go out and pick the daffodils that are at the front step, then arrange them around Grandpa's bed, and then we would sing, we would pray, and involve all of the children holding hands, to therefore the other formal one where it gets into the details of then having to call for individuals who have not pre-planned. So it can run the full gamut. Within the religion itself, it is very Protestant. It is calling upon either a funeral home or the minister to come and be with the family, or in many instances, I've been fortunate to be there to do the work. Okay, so
Yes.
that's what we do.
Yes, thank you, Bev, and I just want to say thank you for sharing that story about one of the things that you've done, where you try and involve the grandchildren and give them
Yes.
a task to do as well. I think that's so beautiful of picking flowers and arranging it around the bed. So thank you for that, and I think you also highlight something important too about where unfortunately there are still some individuals who haven't really thought about or made any concrete decisions about their end of life or their passing or how they want to be remembered. So it can definitely come down to these moments of sort of a bit of internal chaos within the family when they're trying to remember and celebrate their loved ones. So I think that your role in it sounds like they're very grateful to have you. So thank you for that. And Eva, we'll pass it on to you for our final contribution. After a person has died, there are often ceremonies or practices, and could you share what some of those might look like for a member of your faith?
Okay, so because you're saying your faith, and I'm a humanist, but I come from the Jewish culture, I think it's important that people realize that there are multiple movements within Judaism, and each of those movements, or even within those movements, some of the rabbis have different ideas about what needs to be done and what should be done. And I think it's really important that whatever people believe, they believe because they need to believe that. And I think that it's vital that we respect their beliefs, even if we don't believe the same thing, and that we honor the things that are important to them rather than trying to impose upon them things from the tradition which may have zero meaning for them. So I'll just give you a very brief overview of what the Orthodox do, and you kind of know from there that people move away from some of that. So the rabbi always meets with the family and is there to calm and keep the family together and advise them on what they can, and some of them say should do. When I meet with the clients, I spend several hours with them, asking them to talk about the deceased, what are strengths, what are limitations, what were difficult qualities, just so that they can remember the person authentically, because I think it's important to memorialize, to celebrate that person's life with integrity. So in the religious tradition, and very often in all the traditions within Judaism, because the Jewish funeral homes kind of insist on it, there's something called the washing of the body. So it's a purification of the bodies. In the religious movement, they believe that the body is going to go to heaven and in the presence of God, and God is holy and therefore clean, and they need to be holy and clean. They also don't usually dress the person up in regular clothes, but they wrap them in what's sackcloth, because they are now going to become one with the earth. And so we don't have viewings of the deceased person for the public. because we want the public to remember the deceased as they were at their best and not as they may be looking after a long struggle, perhaps. And then there's a watcher that's hired to watch over the body. And this comes from superstitious times when they were afraid that the ghost of the body would escape and come and take revenge. But for people for whom that's important, absolutely, we include that in the rituals. We have usually this ceremony is indoors, but lately it's been at the graveside only. But now they're beginning to open up the funeral homes as well. And, you can have anywhere from 10 people. I did a funeral today where there were over 300 people plus hundreds of people that were live streamed in. So it just depends on who knows this person and what it is that they want everybody to remember about the person. So we do a celebration of life where we talk about the person, how they lived their lives, where they were born, their education, a eulogy. Often I sometimes do it, but I prefer it if the family does it because they know the person better. But I have a lot of information as well, because when I have them talk about the person, I get a lot of this information. So we do a memorialization. We talk about life. We talk about death. We talk about family. We talk about how important it is to pass on the legacy of this person, and that their immortality is in your memory and in the difference that they made in the world, because that difference lives on. And we hope that the people will take the light that was in this person and incorporate it in their own lives, and thus use it to shine a light on the world and on others, to pass on the heritage of this person. And then we bury the person. And in our tradition, the humanistic tradition, we let the people choose whether they want to be cremated or buried. In the religious Orthodox tradition, they are primarily buried. And then there's something called a shiva, which for some people is important. It means sitting, and the family sits at home, and people come and visit, and they bring food, and they talk about the deceased, and give solace to those who are struggling, and also wonderful memories that they have about the person who dies. And that usually goes on for 7 days. In the Reform movement, it goes on for 3 days. In our movement, we let the family choose. And if they only want it after the ceremony, that's fine. If they want to continue, that's also fine.
Wow, thank you so much. Yes, yeah, thank you. That was a very comprehensive answer. And thank you so much also for making that distinction that everybody follows different preferences within the traditions and within the rituals. And so it's really up to each individual, the one who's passed, as well as the family members as well, to decide how best to memorialize the individual that's passed. And I think there's something also very beautiful that you mentioned about preserving the full and true legacy of that individual, not just the good, but also the bad, and what their impact was on the world, and really representing the full authenticity of the individual that's passed. So thank you so much for that answer. And thank everybody else as well. Thank you for your answers. We're going to move on to our next question. And this is still related to end of life, but now we're going to talk a little bit more closely about medical assistance in dying for this next question. And so Bev, we'll start with you this time. I'd like to ask, what was your first encounter with MAID and the assisted dying space?
All right. My first encounter with MAID was about 6 months after it was passed and being legal. The person was so intent upon doing it, there was not any doubt, had belonged to Dying with Dignity for quite a while, and gave me a call and said, would you be willing to help me with the paperwork, help me navigate how I can get this done? Of course, I consented, and it was a wonderful opportunity to explore someone who had thought about it and had discussed it with family. The spouse, a lovely wife, was very compliant and very kind in helping him navigate his way through. As we walked through it, then became the next layer, of course, is dealing then with the family. But again, in a family where the father had sort of been quite easy in his conversion or conversation rather in this is what my final wish will be. A lot of those roadblocks that were sort of fear in other parts of the family were very easily addressed because also they had been part of nature, lots of hiking, walking, being at one with nature. So it was therefore not as foreign as it is to individuals who all of a sudden, oh, by the way, your mother wants to have MAID done, which brings out such an important point to make certain that people talk it over. We have a culture at present that does not like to use the word dying, I'm going to die. There's all of the other soft words that go around it. But if we can get more accustomed to the dying with the dignity as you have very wisely chosen as your group, it is a wonderful way to approach it. When the day came, when all the arrangements were done and everything was in place, at that time it did take a long time, of course, because the paperwork was new, a lot of pages to get through, 2 physicians that were not related to one another and in a smaller town, that takes a fair amount. And also someone that is not at all involved in any of the outcome of a will or whatever of a transfer of assets. All of that was nicely in place. Then when the day came and the appointment is there, I have never seen anything so peacefully done. At that time, of course, it had to be a verbal consent. This person was in enough condition to address that, even though it had been like 15 days from the time of trying to get all the paperwork put together to therefore the procedure being done. And I wish to stress a really important term that really is a medical intervention. This person did not want to go through any more pain, did not want to have his family witness him in pain, and had already been through enough that it was now time. And I wrote in my little book that I described it that I had never seen anything so peaceful after the second injection. And I'll just quote it from it. I just said, after the final injection, the spirit seemed to rise. It is as if the body deflates like a balloon and presses against the bed and slides down. You know it is done. It is so quiet and still. And at that moment, his wife just held me so close and said, oh, you can see the spirit is gone. And I will never forget that quote. Even for the ones that I've seen subsequent, it is a repeated kind of thing. It's as if it is a true elevation of spirit and gone. That was my first encounter.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that, Bev. And thank you so much for standing in to support that gentleman and his family. It sounds like it really was a valuable and transformative experience for you.
Very much so.
Yes. Okay, we'll move on to Yme. Yme, I'd like to ask, what was your first encounter with MAID?
My first encounter actually was before MAID became legal. With my own wife, who was dying of a brain tumor, and she lingered for 4 months. And had MAID been an option for us, we would definitely both have chosen it. I remember begging the doctor at times just for some extra morphine so I could administer it, and began to think about the injustice and the lack of dignity of Laurie's death. At the same time, a dog we had since 2005, so for 10 years, I had to put that dog down in the week of Laurie's funeral. And the two instances in stark juxtaposition for me. And so after a time of mourning and grieving, I got in touch with a local doctor and offered my services as a spiritual leader to her to talk with folks from a spiritual perspective about MAID, and I've done that 4 or 5 times since. But it really goes back to my experience with Laurie and seeing how painful a lingering death can be when it's not necessary.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you for sharing such a personal story. And yeah, I can see that it's still emotional even to talk about it now. And so thank you. Thank you very much for sharing that. And I think you articulate, I think, the situation quite simply, with your wife's passing, and then of course with your pet's passing as well, and seeing the stark contrast in treatment. And I can see why that would have propelled you to take action, or to at least move forward and to learn more. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Okay, of course. Eva, we're going to ask the exact same question. What was your first encounter with MAID?
It's so far back. It's even before they were talking about MAID. So they didn't have a name for it yet. And when Dying with Dignity became a strong feature in Toronto, I had them come in and speak to our congregation and, let them know all the options and things that were available. But the thing that made it most powerful for me when I did become aware of it was my mother struggled for many, many years with Alzheimer's. And I was there at her side every single day, except Saturdays, because on Saturday, I'm not allowed to drive to visit her because she was very religious still. At one point, my mother said in Yiddish to me, "This is not a life." Now, in the religious tradition, you're not allowed to kill, this is the way they look at it, kill someone, but you are also not allowed to prolong a dying. So in other words, if a person is dying, don't start, ventilating them and giving them water and all this stuff, because then you're just going to prolong the suffering that comes with dying. So I knew that a person should absolutely have the right to make their own decisions about what they do with their body. They have the right to choose the way they live. They absolutely should have the right to choose the way they die. And I did not like the way the government was dealing with it. I didn't think the government should even be interfering with it. And I was very active. I was active with the Dying with Dignity. I was active in politics. I was constantly writing letters, making phone calls, because this whole idea of forcing people to prolong it, they're not prolonging life, they're prolonging dying. And I thought that was really disgusting. So I've been involved with it right from the start. I am constantly talking about it and teaching it. I strongly encourage everybody that I meet. I'm also a therapist, so I get to deal with a lot of people. I do meet with them in advance so they can tell me all the things that they want to happen at the time that they die. And I tell them to to write their power of attorney and their, what do you call the power of attorney?
Advanced care directive. It might be, yeah. Yeah.
So I tell them to prepare the advanced care directive, even if at the moment, MAID is not available for those who cannot say at the last minute, "Yeah, I'm good with it now, stick me with a needle." Just so that everybody knows. And I need you to know that I've prepared all those documents. I've paid for everything that needs to be done, including insurance, to take me and my daughters to Belgium if that's where we have to go. If MAID is not available for Alzheimer's patients here, then they are to take me somewhere else to make sure that it happens. Because I like Beverly had said, and like Yme's, you don't want to get your family to watch you struggling and suffering. They love you too much to have to do that. So yeah, I've been with the MAID thing right from the start.
Well, thank you so much for all of your hard work. And yes, I just want to acknowledge, hello, Bev. You're able to join us through video. We get to see your beautiful face. Thank you. I'm so glad for that. And Eva, thank you so much for your answer. It's wonderful to hear that this is something that you felt so passionate about from an early age, and even as well with the impact that you've seen from your mother. And I just want to pinpoint something that you said, that it's at the the aspect that's undignified is to prolong suffering. You're not prolonging life, you're prolonging the dying. And I think that's a really beautiful and articulate way of describing what exactly the movement is about, which is to pass with dignity, to pass without suffering. So thank you so much for that. All right, we're gonna move on. We have to make sure that we stay on time schedule here. So for our next question, this has to do more with, no, your answer was fine. That's not to say that you answered too long, so thank you for that. But our next question is going to be on MAID and supporting a patient, or rather supporting a member of your congregation. And so Bev, we'll start with you now that we have your wonderful video. I wanted to ask, have you ever supported, you mentioned before that you've supported individuals by their bedside when you had that first interaction with MAID, but have you ever supported somebody that was pursuing an assisted death that experienced a conflict between their faith and their choice to have an assisted death?
I have not. With anyone with their faith, I have not done that. My interaction has been with individuals who have family members who are directly opposed.
Okay,
And that has
tell us about that.
Yes, certainly. In fact, it was a minister's wife.
I see.
So it was quite interesting and delicate, of course, which is what we have to be when we are dealing with death, dying, and the end, and such diverse opinions. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of love and a lot of care to hear them. They just want to be heard. They want to be able to express what their fears are and how in the world could this happen. And then finally them blending them all together, because again, the most important part that I feel in all of this is the dignity of the patient. I do come from it, like I'm still 90% a nurse, well, 100% a nurse. That is who I am. I have been since I was born. And it is always the patient-centered care that we are therefore assigned and must do with all our love and compassion that we can muster. Everyone is right in their decision that they wish to make. And ultimately then, it's the idea of them then being the family member who is in such opposition, really hears the true wishes of their mother and why, because it still is her life and her death. And therefore, it took about another 5 sessions following the death to make sure that there was a level of comfort. But that is respect, i.e. the same, almost in the same category as that lovely word dignity, because it also is what her mother said to me: please make sure that you are with her until she comes to a place of ease with what I have done. And that is love. It is love. That is what they are doing. And true faith, truly believing. But the reasons that she chose to have MAID is because she had already endured a long and arduous path of dementia with her own spouse. Daily visits, going, as Yme has said, how hard it tears your heart out when you see the person that you love with all of your heart disappearing, and then they don't even know you. I myself went through that with my spouse. And it takes every bit of love and care and compassion to deal with all of those diverse elements that are around that you must address, because it's all grief. It is, it's sad, they're going. And hopefully then the good part is that we're so fortunate in the fact that we do have religious base, in the fact that you do have something, at least you know, whatever that person has decided, hey, you're going home, you know, hallelujah, you're going to go home. So that's the only way that I often therefore address it is, okay, it's just how are they going to get there? Let's try to do it with as much compassion, care, love, goodness as we can, but with respect. Because in the end, the dignity of the patient is the one that is respected and nurtured. There.
Thank you, Bev. And I just wanted to highlight from that that I thought it was so powerful how you even stayed with the family after the passing of the patient, to really get them on board and to just allow them to hold space and to grieve and to process and to receive all of the love and respect that you were sending to them. So I think that's definitely a valuable part of the process. And I love how you also hone in on how it's really the patient's decision. It's their life and it's also their death as well. And it's about trying to reconcile those two things at a time where family members might be grieving and experiencing a lot of pain from that. So I think your strategy is just wonderful. So thank you. Okay, so now we're going to move on to Yme. Yme, I'd like to ask, have you ever supported somebody that was pursuing an assisted death that experienced a conflict between their faith and their decision?
Yes, I did. The first time I worked with the local doctor I mentioned before was when she told me about a young woman who had been living with a chronic disease, whose pastor told her that he could not support her in her desire for MAID because, as he said, God numbers our days, and she had no right to choose when she would die. And so the doctor asked me to visit with her and her family, and I did that several times. I spent overall about 10 or 12 hours with that family talking about the faith aspect of it. And I suggested to her that if it's really true that God numbers our days, then we ought not to seek any other medical intervention either. I'm a diabetic, and for 35, almost 40 years now, I've been injecting myself with insulin. But if it's true that God numbers our days, I ought not to have done that because God obviously wanted me to die. And of course, she had never thought about that before. And so in redirecting her thinking about that and thinking about this in a completely different way, saying that she has personal agency in choosing not only how to live, but also how to die. I became part of her family, part of her community, and was privileged to be with her when she died. And it was, she died at peace in a way that she would never have been able to do had she just accepted the authority of her pastor. And so it was just such a heartwarming moment for me to be part of that community for a short while.
Yes. Yeah, thank you so much for that. And it sounded like you really had transformed things for her and eased the burden of that internal conflict for her. So thank you. And Eva, the same question to you as well. Have you ever supported somebody that was pursuing an assisted death that experienced that conflict between their faith and their choice?
To say faith again is a little bit complicated here. I recently advised and was there for a woman who you made famous by doing a show about her choice of MAID. But I got together with her and her whole family. Some of her kids were not comfortable with her choosing MAID. They thought that she could live longer, but she knew that her life was absolutely, she could die the next day, and she did not want all that trouble to sit with her family or with herself. So I helped to convince the kids that their mother's choice was an important one, for their mother to feel that she was going to die with dignity. And later the kids, and I did the funeral, and then later the kids came to me and said, thank you for helping us, sit with this, because we got to know things about our mother that we had never known before, because knowing she was dying on a particular day, we made it a point to spend time with her, to ask her questions, and to get to know her and to show our love for her. And, one of the siblings had not spoken a lot to the mother, and this just totally changed the picture. So MAID, in a way, was the savior for the family. In my own family, my family, of course, would not have agreed to MAID, even if it had existed at the time. But we had a conversation, and we all agreed that there was going to be no extra support given if my mother looked like she was going to be dying. And when I was at Baycrest, sitting beside my mother, I made it very clear that they were not to do any interference, just let her die. And if she needed something for any pain, then they should administer that. But after the doctor left the room, the nurse said to me, he didn't follow your instructions. And I went over to the station and I yelled at the doctor and I said, how could you do that? He said, well, he's Catholic and he doesn't believe. And I said, then don't you dare do that for yourself. But don't you dare interfere with the wishes of the family. And I was the person who had the right to make the decisions. So he came and he changed the instructions. And 2 hours later, my mother was dead. So clearly they had been injecting her with water and then she'd get overblown and then they would pull the water out and then they'd inject her with, it was just a horrible experience. And this is not dignified care. So this was just the two that I'll speak of. But if people have a problem with the faith thing, I don't try to convince them to go ahead with something that they absolutely don't believe in. I just say, listen carefully to the person who's dying and let them express what it is that they want and talk about it, not when she's dying or he's dying, talk about it 20, 25 years before and 10 years before and 5 years before. So keep talking about it so you know at all times how they feel about it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eva. We're going to move on a little bit now. I want to ask, and let's start with Yme this time. Yme, I want to ask, has MAID changed your perspective on life and faith, and why or why not?
Not really. I have always believed that a person's dignity is rooted in a foundational value for me, which says that you matter because you are you. And a person has the right to choose and the responsibility to choose how he or she or they might live, and also how he or she or they might choose to die. And that it's all of a piece. There's a wholeness in that. I don't separate one out from the other. And so that sense of dignity has always been with me. Now, if you had asked me 40 years ago, perhaps I might have questioned it a little bit more, but my experiences have led me to become a strong advocate for the possibility of MAID and to support people in their wish and their desire to have MAID provided. And that's been become stronger in me with the different people with whom I've worked around that issue. And it's been a wonderful journey for me. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm sure all of the people that have joined you on that journey as well would say similar things and be so grateful for your support as well. And Bev, will ask the exact same question. Has MAID changed your perspective on life and faith, and why or why not?
I think it's important to point out, just to put a proviso on there, in the fact that the Presbyterian Church itself, when you go on the site, it very clearly states that they are not in favor of any type of euthanasia or assisted death. So I would like to put that out as a bit of a disclaimer on Bev the nurse, because that is truthful. So therefore, is it a little bit opposed to, yes, being Presbyterian totally 100%? Yes. But I think it's an important time within all of our churches and all of our faiths to come to terms with the fact that we're going to die. It's just not in the book. And I think as we age, we become more and more sensitive to the fact, as Yme says, yes, like all of a sudden you start to really hear the word die, because it might be you next. And I think it's really important that we keep up that conversation. And with full respect to you, Rabbi Eva, that we respect your faith. We know that those are the wishes, and they are thousands of years old within your Torah. We know that those things are real, and we respect that as well. And therefore, as a practitioner, also as a nurse, we have been very cognizant of that we do not in any way ever put our faith on another individual. That in fact, you have your rights, whatever you believe, and as a nurse, as practitioner, or end-of-life caregiver, yet you therefore respect the wishes of that person. We are only an assistant at the time to fill out what their wishes are and to make sure that they have wishes in place, because a lot of people don't know about the levels of care and who is your attorney for final wishes and finance versus that of your final wishes in health. And I think that's a large part of the education, which is exactly what we're doing right now. We're just educating. We're asking people to think about dying while you're still alive, while you're still viable, and get your wishes out there. Let's talk about it. And it's already been stolen by Bell, you know, and let's talk about it. But it's so important. And not be afraid. My gosh, I'm not afraid if I walk out of here today and get run over by a truck. Hallelujah, I'm home. Like, good, it's okay. I don't have a wish to go because I got great grandchildren that are, I mean, great. I don't mean great, I mean lovely grandchildren that I want to see grow up and get married, right? I want that. But for now, oh my gosh, if I instill in them that when grandma dies, she's going to be an angel, that's okay for a 4-year-old to know. So do I think that being organized in our exit plan is a bad idea? No. Do I respect people's faith? You bet we do. All of them. At least they have thought about it. They've thought about where are they going to go when they die? Because guess what, buddy? We're all going to die. So think about it. And think about it with love. Not as a sort of a knee-jerk thing, like, oh my gosh, I got to do something now because I'm going to go tomorrow. No, get a plan. And then the people that are standing around your bed and talking to you, they can talk about all the crazy time that you did whatever. Remember when we went swimming and you almost drowned and got out of here when you were 4? You know, those kinds of things when you can talk about life things, and that therefore death becomes not a somber, horrible thing with people in pain. No. It becomes, therefore, a celebration of your life, telling the great stories. And hallelujah, the good thing about MAID, I'm blabbing away. But anyway, I think the best thing that MAID has also done is it has really, really brought into focus the fact that we have to do a better job at palliative care. We have to up the amount of medication that can be given. We have to get specific medications that look after muscle pain. We have to make sure we look at paralysis and make sure we're not pumping fluids into somebody and pretending they're going to come alive again. They're not. We just somehow or other have to figure out a way to get all the fluids off after supposedly something kind was being done. No, palliative care has stepped up. They're doing a better job. And sometimes the pendulum has to swing right over to one direction or the other for there, therefore, to be thought put into things and make decisions that are real and based on kindness and dignity and care.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Bev. I know, a round of applause. And Eva, the same question for you, and maybe I'll change it a little bit. Has MAID changed your perspective on life and your beliefs, and why or why not?
What MAID has done is it confirmed what I already powerfully believed before. And as a teacher of cultural anthropology at the university level, I'm able to tell people, no, it doesn't say that in the Torah. It's not written. It wasn't even said by the early rabbis. Just later on, a rabbi decided that this is what we should do, and then a different rabbi decided, no, that's what we should do, and they're all correct for those who wish to follow them. So what MAID did was it increased my passion to do something to enable people to make their own choices. And I got to tell you, Dying with Dignity keeps hearing from me because I can be saying what's happening with the Alzheimer's people, because the rate is increasing dramatically. as we grow older. And I think that the only place where the government should interfere is to prevent people from killing somebody who should not or who is not ready to die. That's where they need to protect. Other than that, they have no business mixing in. So MAID just increased my passion to fight for this right to make our own decisions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Eva. And for our final question as we wrap up today, and then we're going to move on to our audience Q&A. And Eva, maybe we'll start again with you this time. What would you say to a fellow member of your humanistic movement, for example, that wants to learn more about MAID and doesn't really know much about it, or only really knows sort of the basics, or maybe even misinformation on it?
I send them every piece of information I have. I tell them to contact Dying with Dignity, who's got all kinds of pamphlets, and their website is full of things with information about that, and not to shy away from going to the authorities that have the answers to get the correct information. In our movement, there is nobody that I know that is opposed to MAID. In fact, many of them are in the United States, so we're all fighting for the equivalent of MAID for people to make their own choices.
Thank you. And I'm very glad to hear that you pass our resources and our information on to anybody who's interested. So thank you for that. And Yme, I'll ask you this as well. What would you say to a fellow leader or member of your faith that wants to learn more about MAID?
In addition to what Eva said, because I've also passed on Dying with Dignity's website and the webinars and the blog posts that are there. But I've also recently become a volunteer with another wonderful organization called Bridge for You, which provides support for family members of those for whom MAID is being provided. It's a one-to-one kind of support network for that. So I'm delighted to have learned about that. Beyond that, I say, Google it, search it out, look for in the various health authorities in BC, they all have MAID offices and officers and there's lots of information out there. So, and give me a call. I'll be happy to talk with anybody about this.
That's great. Great. I'm glad to hear from both of you that education is at the forefront of what you would recommend. And Bev, the same question to you. What would you say to a fellow member of your faith that wants to learn more?
Put on a seminar. You guys helped me out so much. I sent a request to you. Could you please send me material? We had 40 people show up and they all took home material. It's available for them here. And they know your website. And we also then did a follow-up on it on end-of-life decisions, which is a wonderful book that is contained within your group of materials for people then to address, their attorney of care, their power of attorney, whatever you call it in each of your provinces, but get that in place. And so I do a lot of that kind of stuff. I might be known as a bit of a nurse death. Here I am, what a lucky thing to be known as. But anyway, it's okay because we have to become familiar as we slide toward the magic number of exits. We have to be aware. We try to treat it with a bit of light at the same time. Thank God we have God. Yay.
Yes, thank you. And I love that saying that you had there at the end. All right, everybody. So this concludes the formal interview section of our webinar today. We're going to move on to audience Q&A. So let's start first with just this first question here, and I'll direct it maybe to Yme. Yme, this person asks, what are some good approaches to getting beyond anger that a dying person may feel towards God about their death or about the fact that they're dying?
It comes down to treating them with compassion and dignity, being with the people and assuring every single person that they are loved and held within the warm, what I sometimes call the warm heart of the universe. That this is not, God doesn't will death, God doesn't will suffering, God doesn't will prolonged dying. And that anger against God sometimes is the most natural thing in the world, and it's okay as long as you don't internalize it, as long as you get it out there, and express that anger.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I think that was a great point you made too about making sure that it leaves you, that you externalize those emotions. And Eva, I'll ask the same question as well as to how you might support somebody or counsel someone who's expressing anger at God for their death or for their imminent death.
The first thing I do is I let people understand that there are only a few reasons why people get angry. And two of the main reasons why people get angry are just masks, because they're masking two very powerful emotions that are too difficult for them to feel. One of them is sadness, and the other one is fear. And so I let them understand that it's okay to feel anger, but like Yme, I would say, allow yourself to feel the pain underneath, the fear underneath. These emotions come from thoughts in your head. What are you thinking? Let's examine what you're thinking so we can change your thinking so that the emotions will be more real and properly expressed for you. And anger at God is not going to get you the answers that you need. Speak to people, speak to yourself, find out what's really happening inside you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And we're running a little bit short. So Bev, we're going to skip over this, but you're going to be answering me first for this next audience question. And this one actually includes a little bit of a love note as well. So I'll include that in there. This audience member says, thank you all so much for this. My partner had MAID in 2020, and I wish so much that we had spiritual guidance. And we'll ask you first, Bev, can you talk about any experiences that you have in providing spiritual guidance to someone that is not specifically connected to a particular religion? So somebody, for example, that might be just spiritual or who's secular or atheist.
Certainly can. When you're at the bedside of individuals as a nurse, it's kind of down to crunch time. And a lot of them experience, so perfectly put, Eva, I call anger the double-edged sword, because the other side of it is fear. And it is like a double. So I say, you bet, lay it on God or lay it on whoever you wish. Let's hear it and let it spew out and get it outside of you. Because then I call it naming the dragon. What is the dragon that you are fighting? And dragon, that goes along with so much of the crazy stuff that's on television and everywhere else. But I now understand dragons. And I let them talk and I let them spew it out and then say, okay. An experience that I had was a man who, in fact, he was going to die. I had done the final words with him and conversation with the family, and then called the family in on behalf of his wife. And they were all going to be hopefully then showing up within the next few hours. And this is a man who had had a rough life, a tough life on himself, brittle alcoholic. Everyone had abandoned him because he had chosen liquor over their family. So I gave instructions to his wife to give me a call for sure, because he believed there was nothing left. There was nothing. He was dying. He was a bad person. He was horrible. He deserved it. And he was like a total agnostic. I waited for the phone call all night long because I was going to go in and do the pronouncement as I promised his wife, and I never got a phone call. So at 6:30, I thought, oh my gosh, like what's going on? So I went there as my first call of the people that I had to see that day, and I walked in, and here he was sitting at the end of his bed. I said, what in the world? What is this? Because all of the signs of impending death were there. I said, oh, Bev, I saw fire. I heard it. People were screaming. They were yelling. and I let me out of here, and a voice came out of the blue. I can't make this up either. Anyway, he said, a voice came out and said, "Do you want to make this right?" And his name. He said, "Oh, yes, it's too hot here. I got to get out of here. Let me go back. Let me go back." And he said, "I'm here, Bev. Call my family." So the apologetic nurse got on the phone, called the family, and said, "There's been a miracle." And he looked at me and he said, "I'm sorry, Bev." My God. Yes, I said, "My God. Thank you for this miracle. I will tell this story as often as I can," because I myself at that point was doubting whether in fact there was a hell. Because again, there are so many other divergent ideas, right?
Absolutely.
Anyway, for this man, he was 6 weeks later, he went to sleep peacefully and all of his family was calm. And do I believe in miracles? You bet. But that came from absolute total atheism all the way around to, oh my gosh, thank you for the chance.
Absolutely.
There's my story. One of them.
Yes.
One of them.
Thank you. Yes, I know. As a nurse, I'm sure you have many, many stories. All right, everybody, we're unfortunately out of time today. I certainly wish we could have gone through more questions, but that's how it goes sometimes. I want to thank all of our panelists for sitting in with us today. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. Thank you for sharing your insights, your experiences. And I just want to show a couple more love notes from our audience members. I just want to express my deep gratitude to all of you for this session. This has helped me tremendously as I support my dear sweet brother going through MAID. What a tremendous webinar. All the speakers had wonderful stories and info to share. I thank each and every one of you. So I think you guys have always talked about love and dignity and respect, and I think it's being beamed right back at you guys today. So thank you so much again.
Namaste.
Bye-bye, you guys.
Yes.
Bye,
Thank
Yme.
you, everybody, and
Bye-bye.
everybody have a good day and
Thank
take
you,
care.
everyone.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Take care.